Hi everyone, and welcome back to AGS Stories. Today's story takes us on a journey of family, betrayal, and the fight for what's right. It's inspired by real-life drama and is bound to leave you thinking. The post comes from the subreddit ETA and is shared by a user whose own father and stepmother tried to claim her inherited house as their own. Talk about family tension. So let's dive into this roller coaster of a story and see how she stood her ground against all odds. My name is Emily, and I'm 24 years old. This is a story about my mother's house, or rather, the house she left to me when she passed away from colon cancer 5 years ago. For as long as I can remember, that house has been more than just four walls and a roof. It was the heart of our lives. My mom bought it long before she met my dad, paid it off entirely on her own, and made it her sanctuary. Even during her illness, she'd remind me, "This house will always be your home, no matter what happens." Things were simpler back then. My parents' marriage lasted 10 years before my dad left us for another woman. I was 8. There were no screaming matches or custody battles. He just packed his things and walked out. He promised to cover my college expenses and set up a fund, but after that, I rarely saw him. He quickly remarried Linda, a woman who doted on their daughter, Sophie. Visits to their rented house always felt awkward, with Linda's forced smiles and my dad's constant excuses about being busy. They had their family, and I wasn't part of it. When my mom passed, just weeks before my freshman year of college, I was shattered. My dad and his family moved into the house to help me cope, and in my grief, I didn't question it. Dad suggested they stay while I went to college, promising to maintain the house and pay the bills. It seemed practical at the time, and for a while, things were fine. But that house wasn't just a building. It was my mother's legacy, a tangible piece of her love and planning. I never imagined it could become the epicenter of betrayal and conflict, a place where lines would be drawn and loyalties tested. Yet, as I prepared to return home after graduation, I could sense that something was deeply, terribly wrong. When I agreed to let my dad, his wife Linda, and their daughter Sophie stay in my mother's house while I went to college, I truly thought I was making the best decision. At the time, it felt like the practical thing to do. Dad promised to pay the bills, maintain the house, and keep everything as it was. He said it would ease the burden on me and ensure the house didn't sit empty for 4 years. I trusted him, even though our relationship had always been distant. For a while, it seemed like things were working out. During my holiday visits, Linda cooked lavish dinners and decorated the house beautifully. Sophie, 10 years younger than me, would pull me into her room to share her school drama or show me her latest art projects. It felt like we were finally building something close to a family dynamic, even if it wasn't perfect. I thought I had done the right thing by trusting them. But everything changed when I came back home after graduation. I was excited to start a new chapter of my life and thrilled to be returning to the house that meant so much to me. However, the moment I tried to unlock the front door and my key didn't work, I knew something was wrong. I knocked, and Linda opened the door, looking startled. She was wearing an apron and had flour on her hands, like she'd been baking. But the surprise on her face wasn't the kind you'd expect from someone happy to see you. "Emily, what are you doing here?" she asked, her tone more accusing than welcoming. "What do you mean? I live here," I replied, wheeling my suitcase inside. I noticed the subtle changes immediately. The curtains were different, the furniture had been rearranged, and my mother's treasured vase was gone from its spot on the mantel. The house felt unfamiliar. Sophie was sprawled on the couch with her phone, and Dad was sitting in Mom's old armchair, reading something on his tablet. Both looked equally surprised by my arrival. "Why were the locks changed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad cleared his throat, a nervous habit I'd seen many times before. There were some break-ins in the neighborhood. I thought it'd be safer." "Safer?" I repeated, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You could have told me, or at least sent me a new key. This is my house, remember?" Linda crossed her arms, her demeanor shifting from startled to defensive. "We weren't expecting you," she said flatly. I stared at her, my unease growing. "Why not? I graduated last week. I told you I was coming home to start my new job." The tension in the room was suffocating. Dad finally stood up, avoiding my eyes. "Emily, can we talk in the office for a minute?" he said, gesturing toward the door. Once inside, the truth came out. Dad admitted that he had lied to Linda about the ownership of the house. He had told her that the house was his, that he had generously allowed my mother and me to live there after the divorce, and that it naturally reverted to him after she passed. I was stunned, unable to comprehend how he could fabricate such a blatant lie about something so important. "I told her I'd figure out a way to move us out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just give me a little time." "Time for what?" I hissed. "To keep pretending this is your house? To let her throw me out of my own home?" "Please, Emily," he begged. "I'm trying to keep my marriage together. Just let me handle this." I left the office feeling betrayed and furious. Linda's sudden coldness toward me now made sense. To her, I was some freeloader overstaying my welcome, a grown woman living rent-free in their home. She had no idea that the house belonged to me, that it was my mother's final gift. That night, Linda cornered me in the kitchen. "So, what are your plans, Emily?" she asked casually, leaning against the counter. "My plans?" I replied, feigning ignorance. "Yes," she said, her tone sharpening. "Now that you're working, I assume you'll be looking for your own place soon. It's time you started living on your own, don't you think?" I bit back my anger and replied calmly, "Actually, I'll be staying here. Dad and I have already discussed it." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she might argue. Instead, she walked away, leaving me with a sinking feeling that this was far from over. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly hostile. Linda's passive-aggressive tactics were impossible to ignore. She accidentally washed my clothes with colors that bled, ruining some of my favorite outfits. She cooked family dinners, but conveniently made just enough for 3 people, leaving me to fend for myself. Sophie, once so warm and friendly, began rolling her eyes whenever I entered the room, calling me that girl in conversations with her friends. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I woke up to an empty house, no sounds of Linda's cooking, Sophie's music, or Dad's TV. I called Dad, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Finally, I tried Linda, and after a few rings, she picked up. "Oh, didn't we tell you?" she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "We're in the Maldives. First-class flights, luxury resort, the works. We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along." I was speechless, but she wasn't done. "You know, Emily, you're nothing but a lazy freeloader living in our house like you own the place. Your father might put up with it, but I'm done. When we get back, I want you gone." Her words were like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone, tears of anger and betrayal streaming down my face. How could they treat me this way, in my own home, no less? Now I'm at a crossroads, and I don't know what to do. Should I confront Linda and tell her the truth about the house? Should I go straight to my dad and demand that he fix the mess he created? Or should I pack my things and leave, even though I know I've done nothing wrong? I need your advice. Have you ever dealt with a situation like this? How do you handle betrayal from your own family? Please, tell me what you would do. After sharing my story, the response from the community was overwhelming. People from all walks of life chimed in with their opinions, offering a mix of support, strategies, and even criticism. Here are some of the most compelling pieces of advice I received. One user wrote passionately, "Emily, this is your house. It's your mother's legacy and her final gift to you. Do not let anyone, not even your father, take that away. Confront Linda immediately and tell her the truth. If she doesn't accept it, that's her problem, not yours. You don't owe her or your dad anything after the way they've treated you. Stand your ground, and if needed, consult a lawyer to make sure your rights are protected." Another user took a more diplomatic approach, suggesting, before you escalate things, try talking to your dad privately. He's clearly stuck in a tough spot, and it might help if you explain how hurt and betrayed you feel. Maybe he'll see how much this house means to you, and will find a way to smooth things over with Linda. Family relationships are complicated, and while I agree that you shouldn't give up your house, there might be a way to handle this without creating a complete rift. On the flip side, a third commenter expressed a surprising level of skepticism. "Honestly, Emily, it sounds like there's more to this story. Are you sure your dad didn't contribute to the house financially at some point? Maybe Linda isn't entirely wrong to feel like they have some claim. It's worth digging into the history of the property just to make sure everything is clear. If you're 100% certain the house is yours, then you have every right to reclaim it. But if there's even a slight chance your dad's story has some truth, it might be better to approach this delicately. Finally, a fourth commenter shared a creative perspective. Why not offer them an ultimatum? Sit down with Linda and your dad, lay out the facts about the house, and give them the option to either pay rent or move out. If they refuse, then it's time to take legal action. This way, you give them one last chance to do the right thing while protecting your own interests. It's a win-win for everyone involved, or at least it gives you the moral high ground. The mix of support and differing viewpoints gave me a lot to think about. While many people encouraged me to take a firm stance and assert my rights, others emphasized the importance of preserving family ties, if possible. The varied responses made me realize that no solution would be easy, but one thing was clear: I couldn't let this situation continue as it was. Now, I just needed to decide how to move forward. After reading through the flood of comments and advice, I felt a mix of empowerment and uncertainty. Many of you encouraged me to stand my ground and confront Linda directly, while others suggested speaking privately with my dad to avoid escalating the situation. Armed with this input, I decided it was time to take action. The following evening, I asked my dad to meet me in the office, my mom's old office. The air was heavy with tension as I closed the door behind us. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he fidgeted with his hands and avoided my gaze. "Dad," I started, my voice steady but firm, "I need you to be honest with me. Why did you tell Linda the house is yours?" He sighed, sinking into the chair by the desk. "Emily, it wasn't supposed to get this far. I didn't think you'd come back so soon. I thought I'd have more time to figure out how to handle this." "Handle what?" I demanded. "Your lie? The fact that she thinks I'm some freeloader in my own house?" "She doesn't understand," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Linda's always felt like she had to fight for what's hers. She grew up in a family where nothing was ever handed to her. I thought if she believed the house was ours, it would give her some sense of stability." I was stunned. "So, to make Linda feel better, you erased everything this house stands for? You erased Mom? You erased me?" "Emily, I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting my family." "Protecting your family?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I'm your family too, or have you forgotten that?" Before he could respond, the door swung open. Linda stood there, arms crossed, her expression icy. "What's going on in here?" she asked, her tone sharp. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Linda, we need to talk about the house." Her eyes narrowed. "What about it?" "It's mine," I said plainly. "It always has been. My mom bought it before she even met my dad, and she left it to me in her will. Dad lied to you." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She turned to my dad, her voice trembling. "Is this true?" Dad hesitated, and in that moment, everything unraveled. Linda's anger erupted like a volcano. "You lied to me? You let me believe this was our home? How could you do this to me?" I stood there, watching the chaos unfold, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and frustration. "This isn't about you, Linda," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "This house was my mom's. It's my home, and I won't let anyone take that away from me." Linda spun back toward me, her eyes blazing. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over? We've been living here for years, taking care of this place, paying the bills. Do you have any idea how ungrateful you sound?" "Ungrateful?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't about gratitude, it's about respect. Respect for my mother, for her wishes, and for the truth." At that point, Sophie wandered into the hallway, looking confused and uneasy. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice small. "Go to your room, Sophie," Linda snapped. "No," I said, my tone softening as I looked at my half-sister. "She deserves to know what's happening." I explained everything, the history of the house, my mom's will, the lies Dad had told. Sophie listened quietly, her expression shifting between shock and sadness. When I finished, she looked at me with tearful eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered. The conversation ended with Linda storming out of the office and Dad following after her, leaving me alone to process what had just happened. I felt drained, like I'd run a marathon, only to find the finish line moved farther away. Now, I'm at a crossroads again. While I've asserted my rights, the conflict is far from over. Linda is furious, and I can tell she's not going to back down easily. My dad is caught in the middle, and Sophie, well, she's just a kid trying to make sense of everything. I know I've done the right thing by standing up for myself, but the weight of it all feels overwhelming. Have I just destroyed what little semblance of family we had? Could I have handled this differently? I need your advice again. How do I move forward from here? Should I continue to fight for the house, knowing it's rightfully mine, even if it means losing my dad and Sophie in the process? Or is there a way to salvage this mess without sacrificing my integrity? Your support has meant the world to me so far. Please, share your thoughts and experiences. I'm desperate for some clarity. After my last update, I spent hours reading through your responses. Each comment helped me process the chaos I'm living in right now. The situation with my dad and Linda feels like a pressure cooker, and every passing day adds more tension. But your advice has been a lifeline, giving me the courage to keep standing up for myself. One of the most insightful comments came from a user named @RealTalkRenee, who wrote, "Emily, this is a classic case of manipulation and boundary pushing. Linda's reaction shows she never respected the fact that this was your house, and your dad's actions, while disappointing, aren't entirely surprising. He's been enabling her behavior. My advice? Take control of the situation now. Meet with a lawyer to solidify your rights. You don't owe anyone an explanation or an apology for reclaiming what's yours. Protect yourself before things escalate further." That comment hit home. I've been hesitant to involve legal help because it feels so drastic, but Renee's words reminded me that doing what's necessary isn't the same as being cruel. Protecting my home and my peace doesn't make me the bad guy here. Another user, @FamilyDramaSurvivor, shared their own experience. "Emily, I've been in your shoes. My stepfather tried to claim ownership of my grandmother's house after she passed, even though the will clearly stated it was mine. It was a nightmare, but I fought back. I got a lawyer, laid out the facts, and didn't back down. It took months, but I won. My advice to you, stay firm, but keep it civil. Let the facts speak for themselves, and remember, you don't need anyone's permission to stand up for yourself." Their story gave me hope. It's easy to feel isolated in a situation like this, but knowing others have faced and overcome similar challenges reassures me that I'm not alone. For me, the hardest part is balancing my emotions with the need to act decisively. On one hand, this house is my sanctuary, my mother's legacy, and a symbol of everything she worked for. On the other hand, the fallout from this confrontation is weighing heavily on me. I don't want to lose my dad or alienate Sophie, who's stuck in the middle of something she didn't create. Your words have helped me see that standing my ground doesn't mean I'm shutting the door on family. It just means I'm prioritizing my own well-being. Please, keep sharing your insights. I need every ounce of support as I figure out my next steps. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. After weeks of tension, I finally made my decision. I couldn't continue living in this limbo, constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. It was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine. That Saturday morning, I hired a locksmith to change every lock in the house. Watching the old keys become obsolete gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in weeks. Afterward, I went through the house, boxing up Linda's decorations, Sophie's belongings, and even Dad's golf clubs. I packed everything neatly and moved it all into the garage. The house, which had felt suffocating for so long, began to feel like mine again. I didn't notify them. I wanted them to see the reality of the situation when they returned. It felt harsh, but after Linda's attempts to push me out and Dad's continued silence, I knew I had to act decisively. The confrontation happened that evening. I heard the car pull into the driveway and braced myself. Linda was the first to step out, her face already red with fury. Dad followed, looking tired and resigned, while Sophie trailed behind them, clutching her phone. They hadn't even made it to the door before Linda started yelling. "How dare you!" she shrieked, storming up the walkway. "You changed the locks? You think you can throw us out of our own house?" I opened the door calmly, standing firm as Linda raged. This is not your house, Linda. It never was. I let you stay here out of kindness, but that kindness has been abused. Your things are in the garage. It's time for you to leave." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment she was speechless. Then she turned to Dad. "Tell her she's wrong. Tell her this is our home." Dad looked at me, then at Linda. His shoulders slumped. "She's not wrong," he said quietly. "The house belongs to Emily. It always has." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face twisted into a mask of betrayal and rage. "You lied to me?" she spat at him. "You let me believe this was our home, and you let her do this to us?" Dad didn't respond. He couldn't even look her in the eye. Sophie finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "So, where are we supposed to go?" I softened as I looked at her. She was just a kid caught in a mess she didn't create. "I'm sorry, Sophie," I said gently, "but this isn't about you. This house was my mom's, and it's the only thing I have left of her. I've let things go too far, and now I need to take it back." Linda's fury reignited. "You're nothing but a selfish little brat," she shouted. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You're throwing us out on the street?" I stood my ground. "You just came back from a luxury vacation, Linda. You'll be fine. And let's not pretend you've treated me like family. You've made it clear how little you respect me, and I won't tolerate it anymore." The argument dragged on for another hour, with Linda screaming, Sophie crying, and Dad alternating between trying to mediate and silently watching. Eventually, they loaded their belongings into the car, Linda still muttering insults under her breath. Dad tried to approach me one last time before they left. "Emily," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I know I've let you down. I didn't know how to handle this." "It's too late for apologies, Dad," I replied. "You let this happen. You let her treat me like an intruder in my own home, and you did nothing. I hope you can fix things with Linda, but I need to focus on fixing my life now." He nodded, his expression heavy with regret, and walked away. The moment they drove off, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. It was mine again, and it felt like my mom was with me, telling me I'd done the right thing. It's been 2 months since they left. I've spent that time reclaiming the house. I repainted the walls, brought back my mom's decorations from storage, and planted new roses in the garden. It feels like a sanctuary again, a place of peace and love rather than conflict and resentment. My relationship with Dad is strained, to say the least. He's reached out a few times, but I haven't answered. I'm not ready to forgive him for what he let happen, and honestly, I'm not sure if I ever will be. As for Linda, I haven't heard from her, and I prefer it that way. Sophie sent me a text apologizing for her behavior, which meant more to me than I expected. She's young, and I hope she learns from this. My job is going well, and I've started building a life that feels like my own. For the first time since my mom passed, I feel at peace. This house is my home, and I know now that protecting it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, standing your ground means losing people you thought you'd always have. But it also means gaining something invaluable: self-respect and the ability to live authentically. My mom taught me that, and I'll carry that lesson with me forever. Looking back on everything that happened, I've come to realize just how much this experience has shaped me. It was one of the hardest and most emotionally draining times in my life, but it also taught me some of the most important lessons I'll ever learn. First, setting boundaries is not selfish, it's necessary. Allowing my dad and his family to stay in my house while I was at college might have seemed like the right thing to do at the time, but it blurred the lines of ownership and respect. Establishing clear boundaries early on could have prevented much of the conflict. Protecting your peace and your possessions doesn't mean you're unkind, it means you value yourself. Second, sometimes family isn't defined by blood, but by mutual respect and love. It was painful to acknowledge that my dad prioritized his marriage over our relationship. Linda's actions, too, showed a lack of care for me as a person. But through this, I learned that I don't have to tolerate toxic behavior just because someone is family. Letting go of those who hurt you can be the most freeing decision you'll ever make. Lastly, you have to advocate for yourself because no one else will. Standing up to Linda, and even my dad, wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My mom left this house to me because she wanted me to have security and independence. Honoring her wishes meant fighting for what was rightfully mine, no matter how uncomfortable it was. To anyone out there facing a similar struggle, whether it's about property, relationships, or personal boundaries, remember that you're not alone. It's okay to stand your ground, even if it feels like the world is against you. Doing so isn't about hurting others, it's about protecting yourself. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up for yourself, even against family? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I know your stories can inspire and help others who might be going through something similar. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to AGS Stories. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear about real-life stories filled with lessons, inspiration, and moments that make you think. Let's build a community where we can learn and grow together, one story at a time. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.